Every day it got closer and now we've started season 2. It's the moster. I'm Koala Sedai and I attempted to break down all of season 1 scene by scene, and I only got to the end of episode 1, but that is still going to happen. One of the things I realised is that the way I went about it might have slowed me down too much, because I sat and I wrote physically, into a document all of the information that I was gathering and putting together and then published it on the blog. And then at certain points I gathered it together and read it out to create an audio and video version. So I decided maybe this time I'll start by creating the audio version, then convert that to text later and start putting it in the blog. I really want a text version because it is so much more searchable online. And I thought, if I do it this way, I will also be able to release it in this format a lot more frequently. And, we've probably got 2 years, as we know, until we get season 3. So if I get into it now, only 2 days after season 2 dropped, then I've got a chance of having all of season 2 and then backtracking and completing all of season 1 by the time we get to season 3. I'm not going to take bets on how far I really will get, but I reckon it's time to toss the dice and have a go. Episode 1 of season 2 is called A Taste of Solitude, and it opens with a prologue, and that prologue is the same as the prologue in book 2, The Great Hunt, except that we see it from a totally different point of view. Okay, there are some other differences there, but if you have gone through any of my stuff about season 1, I'm actually not focusing on what the differences are so much as I'm focusing on where they managed to hit the beats correctly and where they told us the story we needed to hear. So I want to start with looking at the prologue from The Great Hunt, because I think that it's really good to refresh on what the important bits of that were, and then we'll look at the prologue from the TV show. So we in the fandom like to affectionately call this scene the Darkfriend social. And in the books, it is all from the POV of the man who called himself Bors. At the time of reading this for the first time, we therefore have no idea who Bors is, and we know that that's not actually his name, because Robert Jordan was so beautifully detailed in saying that this is the man who called himself Bors. The man who called himself Bors is attending this Darkfriend social, and he's moving around through this room trying to figure out who the other important people are who are attending there. Reading directly from the book, it says, his grimace was hidden by the black silk mask that covered his face, though just like the mask that covered the 100 other faces in the chamber. 100 black masks and 100 pairs of eyes, trying to see what lay behind them. To me, this means that the scene takes place just a little bit before Tinker Baby comes running through the door, having discovered the Trollocs outside. And I say that because we don't really know how many people were at this gathering that Ishi had. There could have been more people, and he's brought this group separately into a room. this could be all there is. And I don't think it's important how many people are there, although I know that having 100 people there does give a real feeling for just how many Darkfriends there really are out there. I feel one of the really important points is that nobody knows who the other people are that are there, and nobody really knows exactly what's going on. There's also this really interesting description about the room, which is the fireplaces. And we see this in the scene in the TV show. So it says that if one did not look too closely, the huge room could have been in a palace. But that doesn't mean, of course, that it is in a palace. Now, I love, if I get to the fireplace bit, the fireplaces were cold, for one thing. Flames danced on logs as thick as a man's leg, but gave no heat. So in the TV show series, we see all these fireplaces around them in the room, but I can just about guarantee they were, again, just for effect. They were not actually giving out any heat. I had the really interesting experience of watching the TV show with a good girlfriend of mine who has not read the books yet. And I was extremely interested watching her reaction to how many new characters were introduced in the first 3 episodes of season 2. She was quite overwhelmed with the amount of information that was being sent her way so quickly. So when I look at the way they did the Darkfriend social, I can guarantee you she's already half forgotten that even happened at all, because there was so much that came after it. And, you know, I remember feeling a bit that way when I read the first few books myself. I think on the first reread, I got to this prologue and I was kind of like, what is this? Because I think I had pretty much forgotten about it too, because the Great Hunt suddenly took us on all this adventure and we didn't, really, we didn't know who had been at the social, and therefore I had sort of dropped that information out of my brain. So I feel that they actually did a good job of it in the show for people who don't know what the hell is going on. Because what they saw was that there was this weird building, bang, right at the beginning. Ishmael is still alive, not destroyed like Rand thought at the ending of the last season. There are people in either high places or very influential places who are on the side of the shadow. There is an Aes Sedai, and we already knew that there was some pretty shitty stuff going on at the White Tower, but we know now there is an Aes Sedai. I'm really interested that we get told that Lady Suroth is actually involved in all of this. We'll talk about this more as we get into things with the show, but at first, before this season started and we'd seen little snippets of this, I was like, oh, maybe it's not Lady Suroth, maybe they're trying to trick us, but it is. We can't actually identify anybody else. However, there are 11 guests and Ishmael there. So we know Ishmael, and we know that Padan Fain is there. So that means that there are 10 people that we have to identify, and I'm going to be really interested as we go through the TV show to find out whether we actually do identify all 10, because we know that we certainly never identify the entire 100 that are at the prologue in the book. All right, so back to looking at the description that is in the book, which is that then there are servants and they're circulating around. And, to be honest, when you look at how many pages that prologue goes on for and how many words are in there, there is no way that we have time in the TV show to go to that kind of depth. However, what we do find out is we find out that the man who calls himself Bors is able to not identify who some of the people are, but some of the types of people that are there. So I'm going to start by having a little bit of a look at that. What the man who calls himself Bors notices is that the clothing worn by a lot of the people there told him a lot about them. For example, a woman standing before a gold and crimson wall hanging, speaking softly to her figure, had chosen the spot because the colours of the tapestry set off her garb. Doubly foolish to draw attention to herself, for her scarlet dress, cut low in the bodice to show too much flesh and high at the hem to display golden slippers, marked her from Ilion, and a woman of wealth, perhaps even of noble blood. We'll pop that into our little brain. Not far beyond the Iliana, another woman stood, alone and admirably silent. I'm skipping little bits to just read out the important bits. Very admirable that, but her coppery skin and her creamy high-necked gown, leaving nothing but her hands uncovered, yet clinging, and only just barely opaque, so that it hinted at everything and revealed nothing, marked her just as clearly of the first blood of Arad Daman. And, unless he missed his guess entirely, the wide golden bracelet on her left wrist bore her house symbols. A man in a high-collared, sky-blue Shinerian coat passed him, with a wary head-to-toe glance through the eye-holes of his mask. The man's carriage named him soldier. The set of his shoulders, the way his gaze never rested in one place for long, and the way his hand seemed ready to dart for a sword that was not there, all proclaimed it. His nose wrinkled in sudden disgust. Even a tinker, in bright green breeches and a virulent yellow coat. We can do without those come the day. A slender fellow, slender even in a floor-dragging black robe, watched from the shadows. He could be anyone from anywhere, except for the six-pointed star tattooed on the web between thumb and forefinger of his right hand. One of the sea folk, then. Suddenly, his eyes narrowed, fixing on a woman enveloped in black till nothing showed but her fingers. On her right hand rested a gold ring in the shape of a serpent eating its own tail. Aes Sedai, or at least a woman trained in Tar Valon by Aes Sedai. None else would wear that ring. Either way made no difference to him. He looked away before she could notice his watching, and almost immediately he spotted another woman swathed from head to toe in black and wearing a great serpent ring. I love this line. The two witches gave no sign that they knew each other. So the fact he calls them witches, okay, that is what gave us quite a clue. A High Lord of Tyr and a high officer from the Andorran Queen's Guard. Now we can add into that we actually see the face of Padan Fain, and when I add up all of those descriptions, I get a total of 11 people. Interesting. There are some other vague descriptions of nationalities that he notices, but those were the most complete descriptions that we got. I hadn't noticed that until I sat down this morning with the book and started going through it. The interesting part that happens next in the book is that then the chime sounds. The tall doors at the far end of the chamber swing open and two Trollocs step into the room. We get a description of the Trollocs and, how horrific they are, etc. But the Trollocs have actually, kind of announced the presence as a Madral steps between them and everyone falls to their knees. And if you're listening to this, you've read the book, and we know that it was a big shock to everybody that a Madral could take the place that he's taking in this whole thing. So, of course, we missed all of that, but you know what, I'm glad we did, because I think it was too much to bring in with the show. I think that we actually instilled a lot more absolute creeping dread by the way they did it. It's interesting that in the book, they basically get the feeling that they are being addressed by the Great Lord of the Dark. And we know that there's a lot of deception going on there. In the show, they have decided to kind of drop that pretense of Ishmael being the Great Lord of the Dark. And yet, I think that non-book readers are still going to be totally confused as to what the difference between them is. So I think that they're still doing a good job of keeping a lot of the confusion going, because it can be really hard when we're people who have read the books multiple times over decades to really step back into that feeling of total confusion that we had on the first read, and how we were still confused about an awful lot on the second read. I love that in the book we get this line: "I have been known by many names, but the one by which you shall know me is Baalzamon." So again, in the book, there's still this huge confusion between whether Baalzamon is the Dark One and just exactly what's going on. Of course, in the show, we have not yet heard the name Baalzamon, but we do get Father of Lies, Betrayer of Hope, Forsaken, and we have heard Ishmael. We have also heard the Dark One. Another name I don't believe we got in season 1, please correct me if I'm wrong, is the Chosen. So there's enough going on that I know that my friend who hasn't read the books yet is still very confused on all of this stuff, which is just how it's supposed to be. In the book, we get quite a long monologue then from Baalzamon about that the place they're at is in the shadow of Sha'ul Ghul. Fear not, for the day of your master's rising upon the world is near at hand. We get the whole, the wheel of time will be broken and blah-de-blah, all of that stuff that we know. That is all really important stuff, but would have just become a boring information dump instead of a hook to bring people into the horror of Darkfriend and what is going on. So I think it's good that they missed this out in the show, even though we would have loved to have heard some of this. I think that what was really important was, instead of then getting the shimmering of the air and, seeing Rand and Perrin and Matt as holograms, hanging in the air above him, etc., we simply get Tinker Baby under the table looking at all of the different clothing that people are wearing on the bottom half of them, and we simply come in on the conversation and we hear Ishmael saying, "Where is he now? The one who walks the world, the one who was and will be, but is not yet the dragon. Randall Thor. He released me at the eye of the world, and he thinks he can hide. He cannot." Now, in the books, however, he says, "There is now one who walks the world, one who was and will be, but is not yet the dragon." Hang on, that's the same words. How about that? In the book then, a startled murmur runs through his listeners, and someone says, "The dragon reborn? We are to kill him, great lord?" In the show, a cloaked woman says, "We are to kill him?" Ishmael in the show replies, "Perhaps he can be turned to my use. Sooner or later, it will be so, in this age or another." In the book, the answer is perhaps and perhaps not. Perhaps he can be turned to my use. Sooner or later, it will be so, in this age or another. I just can't tell you how much it warms my heart, because do you know what? That was the most important part of the entire prologue, was the fact that we find out Ishmael is still alive. He is the one who is pulling the strings and coordinating a whole heap of dark friends out in the world. In the book, a shitload. In the show, enough that it's scary, because they are obviously people of influence. And are they supposed to kill Randall Thor? No, not necessarily. Ishmael hopes to turn him to his side. And if we think back to what Dana was saying in season 1, she absolutely brought us to this point. Because if you go back and read the prologue in The Great Hunt, we get a lot of that break the wheel stuff. So we didn't have to repeat that here, because we had Dana get us prepared for that already in season 1. The next thing that happens in the book is that each person then receives their own instructions. And while that's happening, each one of them just basically gets cut off from everybody else in the room, and they're just got, their own little inside their head loudspeaker going on, giving them their stuff. And that is what is happening when Ishmael ducks down under the table and goes, "Excuse me, you're interrupting." So either he has put them on hold, and they're all sitting there unable to move, listening to the elevator music on the phone while they wait for their turn at getting their instructions, or Ishmael can multitask, and he was giving them all their instructions one by one. In the books, we then find out the instructions that are given to the man who calls himself Bors. In the show, instead, Ishmael takes Tinker Baby outside to that absolutely terrifying scene where he instigates the petting zoo. It's very different. However, it's totally in line, and I feel that it creates such a feeling of trepidation and horror in a more visceral way through that visual of what he does to Tinker Baby, that we get quite a different feeling of trepidation. Yeah, I think that's the best word. At the end of the prologue in the show than what we got, because in the book then it goes on to we kind of, I guess, we're getting the trepidation of what was being done to the servants. And then, Boaz gets himself out and we're inside his head and what he's feeling. One of the things I love about what the show is doing is that we get more of a visceral reaction to how we're feeling about what is happening to people than to sitting so deeply inside what they're feeling. We got to see Tinker Baby's innocence, her fear at the Trollocs, her reaction to Ishmael and how trusting she was. And we got enough of an idea of what she was thinking and feeling, but we really got to sit in how we felt about what was going on. And I think that that is brilliant television. The only thing that I haven't covered that was different in the show version was the fact that we all saw Padam Fain there. Now, they've made it really clear to us that Padam Fain is the big baddie, or one of the big baddies. He's not the big baddie, but he is a big baddie. So having him there, I think, was a great clue that he is not only a bad person, a dark friend, but he is a big bad, because he actually was able to let go of the phone that was on hold and turn his head away from being transfixed on that. And he was able to see what was happening in the room and have a bit of a response to her and even catch her attention. Even her mum was not aware that she had ran into the room, slammed the door, run under the table and was calling for her mum for help. Only Padam Fain was aware of that. So again, for people who have not read the books, they have no idea what that means, but it is this beautiful clue that Padam Fain is something else quite different. Those of us who have read the books know that Padam Fain was chosen to be the Dark One's hound, and he was tasked with seeking the dragon reborn, and he made a dark pact with Baalzamon. It just would have been too much to have that shown to us as a whole separate thing. So putting it here was brilliant. I'd love to know what you think of my breakdown. I would love you to share what I'm doing with others. Subscribe, encourage people to subscribe and get involved in conversations with me. I'm actually at this point just holding back a little bit from watching other content creators doing deep dives, because I'm just wanting to sit for a little bit at this point and examine how I'm feeling about what I've seen. And then I can't wait to see what other content creators are talking about with all of this, because I am no expert. I just love this story, and I just love how we are getting such a new way of looking at the story that we know so well. It's giving me fresh eyes into how the book has told us so many things, that it's kind of bringing the book to a new life for me. So I hope that you're finding it that way, and I can't wait to enjoy more Wheel of Time with my favourite fandom family. Thanks for listening.